Welcome, everyone, to the Global Spaceport Alliance webinar series. Today, we have a great update from its director, Pam Underwood, on activities at her office. I am James Causey, Executive Director of Global Spaceport Alliance. Before we start, I have a few things I'd like to draw your attention to. First, thanks to our title sponsor, RSNH, and our co-sponsors, BRPH and American Company. I'd also like to welcome a new associate member inside AOA, which is an offshoot from Walt Disney Imagineers. Also, please look at the latest e-newsletter that we just sent out. George has done a great job of summarizing the impacts of the SpaceX launch last week. Finally, I'd like to draw your attention to an event taking place next week at the Space Florida headquarters on May 2nd and 3rd, the State of the Industrial Base Workshop. If you have any interest in attending this, you can do it in person or virtually, and Dale Ketchum at spaceflorida.gov can give you the details. As we go through today's session, if you have any questions, please use the chat box. And now, let me get out of the way and let George Neild introduce Pam and let the session run. Thank you, George.
Thank you, James, and greetings, everyone. This is certainly an exciting time in the world of commercial space. Many of us gathered in Colorado Springs last week for the Space Symposium, which is always a great gathering. I was fortunate to have the opportunity to moderate a special session on challenges in the design, development, and operation of commercial spaceports. And we had some excellent discussions there with a number of different kinds of folks participating. Pam Underwood was representing the FAA Office of Commercial Space Transportation. We also had Yaron Wink from Dawn Aerospace, and we hope to invite him back to a future webinar. Colonel James Horn from the Space Force was there, along with Tom Engler from NASA Kennedy Space Center, Scott McLaughlin from Spaceport America, and Randy Likens from Jacobs, who helps out in the development of spaceports around the world. So very interesting discussion and good feedback there. James mentioned the launch of Starship. That's certainly a major milestone for our industry, and not only because of the capabilities of that vehicle, but as an indicator, I think, of the kinds of things that are happening in our industry now. We're really seeing a maturing, I think, in the acceptance of risk where the benefits warrant that, and a lot of innovation and a lot of different kinds of participants in the space arena now. So a very exciting time. We also have ongoing Pathways workshop series that you may have seen about. Our fourth and final session for this year is coming up on Saturday, and that's targeted primarily to college folks who might be interested in aerospace, and particularly the students who are involved in the Spaceport America Cup, the rocketry competition that takes place in June at Spaceport America. And that's been going very well, and a great chance for us to reach out and engage with students and our future aerospace workforce. Finally, I'd like to mention that a couple of weeks ago, I had the opportunity, along with Jim Bridenstine, the former NASA administrator, to meet with Oklahoma Congressman Frank Lucas, who is the chair of this Science, Space, and Technology Committee in the House, and basically spent more than a half hour with him and reviewed at the top level the kinds of things we discussed at our Spaceport Summit in Florida at the end of February. And same time, we presented him with some draft legislation and a top-level summary of the kinds of things that we're asking for from the spaceport community. And those include the recognition that, hey, this may be the time to now recognize commercial spaceflight as an independent mode of transportation by moving the Office of Commercial Space Transportation from the FAA back to the Department of Transportation and allowing it to oversee the industry from that perspective, which I think would be a big help. We also are advocating for adoption of a national spaceport policy, additional funding for the office there, providing funding for the Space Transportation Infrastructure Matching Grants Program for spaceport infrastructure, modifying the definition of space support vehicles to allow commercial human spaceflight training to occur at our spaceports, establishment of a goal to lead the world in point-to-point transportation, which we think is just right around the corner. And then finally, bringing back a commercial space transportation research program, particularly focused on human research in reaction to the opportunity for regular people to travel to space. NASA's got 60 years of data on astronauts flying to space, but most of those were relatively young and excellent physical health and condition. And the folks that are going to be living and working in space in the future are not necessarily of that same category. And so it's a great chance for us to, on a voluntary basis, collaborate with government, industry, academia, and our international partners and see what those impacts are on people that fly to space, so that some of the necessary medications, countermeasures, and other treatments can be developed to allow them to be safe and successful during their time in space. So again, a lot going on, but let's go ahead and transition to our guest speaker today, Pam Underwood. Many of you know her well. She is currently the director of the Office of Spaceports at the FAA Office of Commercial Space Transportation. And she's been there for about 16 years now and has on the order of 25 years of aerospace experience in both private industry and in government. And prior to joining the FAA, she was a solid rocket booster integration engineer for United Space Alliance, working on the NASA shuttle program. She was a wind tunnel test engineer at the National Transonic Facility at NASA Langley, and she was an instrumentation engineer for Pratt & Whitney in their large military engines division. She had earned a BS degree in aerospace engineering from Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University and an MS in aerospace engineering from Virginia Tech. So Pam, it's great to see you again. Thanks so much for speaking to our group today.
Thanks so much, George, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever the part of the world you're in. I'm really happy to be with you guys today. Thanks so much for the time. I always chuckle when I hear the intro that George just read, because I have to tell you, my husband, when he hears it, just thinks I'm just a giant nerd. So that's pretty much it. Been doing this for a long time, and of course, very excited. My current role as Director of Office of Spaceports, and I appreciate the opportunity today to give you guys an update on some of the things that we're working on that are of great importance to me. And I'm sure, given the Global Spaceport Alliance focus, you guys will be happy to hear as well. Let me ask if there's any questions during the meeting. I know George is watching. We've got some other people. So I'm going to be sharing my screen here, so it might be hard for me to see the questions coming in, but we'll do my best. I love questions. I think that makes the best kind of presentations possible. So let me go ahead and share my screen. My computer is not working. Okay. I think it advanced screen now. Okay, so my first thing I'd like to give you guys an update on is the Spaceport Report. A long time in coming. You guys might remember the FAA received this homework assignment from the 2018 FAA Reauthorization Act. I'm happy to say that it was delivered February 2023. You can click on the report there, but I also provided the URL for folks to go take a look at, but it was delivered. And let me focus in on the next slide on some of the statistics we put in there, because I like data. And one of the things I like to put forward is data about our spaceports. And these particular charts, which are in the report, in my opinion, indicate utilization. But hold on to that thought, because I want to finish that in a moment. This is just what's in the report. So spaceport utilization, if you look at the data of just the FAA licensed activities for those, just if we want to look at just last year, 92% of all the activities were vertical activities. 92% of our FAA licensed activities were vertical. And we have 9 of our 14 FAA licensed spaceports are licensed for horizontal launches. That's about 64%. So it's just based on the data, clearly the preponderance of activity has been with the vertical launches, not the horizontal, but we have the most horizontally licensed FAA licensed spaceports at the present time. About 2/3 of all the US launches occurred on federal ranges, 62%, and the rest occurred at either FAA licensed spaceports or some of our exclusive use launch sites. So it's just good to take a snapshot of what the utilization is from a launch perspective. Please note the little asterisks on the chart so you can tell we're very careful about how we indicate the data here. But also, you know, it's interesting to note the amount of international launches that are occurring. So notice that in the bottom chart there on the side. So it's just good to kind of watch the trends and how our spaceports are being utilized. So like I said, I like data. I like this data. We'll continue to provide this data because I think it's good year over year to take a snapshot of how our spaceports are being utilized. But one of the things that I'm not happy with is this only talks about launch. And if we want to look at spaceport utilization, which is the title of this chart, we need to provide data about utilization in its totality. All I have right now at the present time, because we license the activities, is the launch information. Of course, the reentries would be as well. But, you know, it's the other parts of the utilization of spaceports that define that full ecosystem. And that's what maybe in a future iteration of this, I would like to try to get to is, you know, engine testing. That's not represented here. Or other types of testing, or other types of manufacturing or developments that are occurring on the spaceports that are space related and very needed to support launch, but they don't necessarily make this chart. So I hope you understand, you know, I'm happy with the spaceport utilization, you know, characteristics that we have now. I think it paints a good picture. You know, it's good to identify gaps or areas for improvement if you're looking at infrastructure, but I feel like we want to move into that next step, which is full utilization of our spaceports, because that's what I try to let people know. That whole ecosystem that survives with the spaceports is really what we ought to be including. Again, this is just the first cut from our spaceport report that was delivered in February of 2023. I highly recommend you take a look at that report. I'm well open to feedback. That's one of the things that I've noticed that I'd like to see for future years. I'd welcome any other input that you guys have, because I have gotten a great deal of information from folks that have taken a look at it, that they appreciate the data that is provided in this report. Now let's see what we can do to improve it on in the future. Looking at the next chart, things are busy. Looking at the predicted future demand, I like this chart. This is something that we actually put out as an agency with all of our agency forecasts year over year. Commercial space is a little different than some of the other lines of business. It's a little bit harder to forecast year over year, but we've gotten it down pretty good. You can see this chart starts in 2015, and it does show, of course, an increase. In 2022, what we had as far as our totals and what we're projected for 2023, around 100. And we're well on our way for this going forward. But definitely things are not slowing down. Please keep a note again, the theme here is this is really predicated on launch and reentry. This doesn't describe the total utilization of our spaceports. So when we look at spaceport utilization or operations taken care of at these spaceports, I think that there's another way to be characterizing some of these things for spaceport utilization, kind of the theme I'm trying to get at here. But the launch and reentry operations is a good indicator that our industry is clearly not slowing down. But I think if we've found a way to be able to include some of those other forecasts with engine testing or manufacturing or things like that that describe the ecosystem, we would see a much busier chart and really describe all the great work that's going on at our nation's spaceports. So on to some current projects that we have going on in Office of Spaceports. We're definitely not slow for sure. The first chart here talks a lot about international. I think a lot of you know that we work with a lot of our international partners. We want to work with countries that are developing regulations to promulgate US practices and regulations. We have 20 years of experience. We've licensed over 500 activities. I believe the current number is 536 to date, which is a huge number since 1989. And we'd like to leverage that experience with other countries that are looking to have their own and develop their own spaceports and space economies within their countries. We want to work with countries that are looking to host US launch operations or reentry operations to minimize duplicative requirements. Of course, first we want to have a consistent set of requirements, and then we want to take it to the next level and think, how can we work together so that we're not duplicating approvals between governments? We don't duplicate aircraft certification. There are agreements in place to acknowledge or accept aircraft certification between countries. That's where we need to go with space. It's going to take us a little bit of time to get there, but that should be the end state that we're all trying to work towards. And of course, we have ongoing work with the countries listed there in that third sub-bullet. And among other countries, a lot of them beyond are not on this list that we are talking to as well. So it's definitely a very exciting time. Our industry is going global, and that's what we want to do. We feel like we in the FAA have an opportunity to then work with other governments to provide this stable regulatory environment so it can continue to grow globally. It's a very exciting time. Another piece that I'd like to talk with you about today is on international agreement development. In addition to the international partnerships I described in that first main bullet, we want to taking it to the next level. We want to have a consistent set of requirements, and then we want to work together to reduce duplication. So that's where this international agreement development piece comes in. The FAA, we don't have any binding commercial space international agreements at the present time. We have several non-binding agreements, but if we want to get to that area where we are recognizing other approvals or, relying on each other for reducing duplication of some kind, we need to work into that binding agreement. So we're working on what that would look like at the present time, so we can hope to use it with some of the countries where US operators are looking to work with. It really takes us into that next level, especially with what George mentioned earlier about point-to-point transportation. What are the types of things that we need to have in place? Are there things of that we need to bring into these binding agreements? Those kinds of things kind of in scope are what we're looking at to try to kind of formalize our partnerships with other countries is going forward. And I put in parentheses there, for any of you familiar with aviation, there is something called a BASA, a Bilateral Aviation Safety Agreement. And that's how they really enable a lot of that certification and other partnership work on the aviation side. That's a really good model for us. Space is different, but it's a good model for us to consider for the space side as well. So these next two current projects, I also have additional charts on. So, we'll talk about them in more detail here in a few minutes. But in summary, we've started these spaceport security reviews. I know I've briefed this group before. It started in 2022. It's still going very well. It's really to identify a threat vulnerability assessment for all of our FAA licensed spaceports in the areas listed here on the chart. And we'll talk more about team membership here in a moment, but that effort is still ongoing. And it's really producing some very interesting results. And we've got some great support from our security partners in that effort as well. And then the last piece that I'll mention also, we have more charts. I have several charts on this National Spaceport Interagency Working Group. I'll give you guys some updates on some of the things we've been working on and some of the activities we have going on in the future.
Hey, Pam?
Yeah.
Hi, Ted here. Sorry.
Hey, Ted.
But I've had a phone in each ear all morning today. Listen, I just wanted to share with the group. We were one of the spaceports that has undergone this security review with you and the combined team. And I can just tell my colleagues that have not undergone this yet, it's an extraordinary effort. What we have learned out of it, we got our report, Pam. We did get our report last week. What we have learned out of it is superb for us to better our posture. But kudos to Pam Underwood and this combined team. They are extremely collaborative when they come to your spaceport. They bend over backwards to work within your activity. And we had a pretty hairy schedule in December when they came to visit us, but they worked inside of all of that and truly did not get underfoot while doing this assessment. We've got some things we're going to work on, and we would not have been, those things would not have been identified had this effort not taken place. So to me, it was an extraordinary effort, extremely well done, extremely professionally done. So to my colleagues out there in Spaceports that have not done this yet, I would tell you, reach out and get your opportunity to do it, because you'll learn a lot from it and allow you to better posture your spaceport. And it's done in an extremely well done way. So I just wanted to share that.
Thanks, Ted. You'd think we paid Ted for that, but we did not. Appreciate it. It's really a testament to the professionalism of the team. And thanks so much, Ted. That's really valuable feedback. Really appreciate it. So let's move into a little bit more about these spaceport security reviews. For those of you who may not be familiar with it, it is an extension of the FBI Civil Aviation Security Program. This team, this CASP team, was stood up to look at threat assessments, threat vulnerability assessments at about 30 of our nation's busiest airports. In doing that, they asked the question, what about spaceports? They contacted me, and well, here we are, a year and a half or so later. So it's been an extension of that team. It is led by the FAA, because what we found very quickly is that no one security agency has authority over space and spaceports. The FBI did not feel that they could do this on their own. They clearly have authority in aviation. I think we're all familiar with that. Department of Homeland Security, same thing. They did not feel like it was within their jurisdictional areas, no authorities, as well as we've got help with the U.S. Secret Service. They too felt the same way. So the FAA, while we regulate spaceports, I think everyone knows that we're not a security agency. We're a safety organization. So what we were able to do is work with the spaceport directors and just asked, hey, can we come in and do this? So that's why it's really great to get feedback like Ted just provided. It's a voluntary assessment. The FAA nor any of those security agencies can make any of these spaceports do this. It's because the spaceports want to learn. They want to get better. We've got a great team. And it's discreet. The information is only provided back to the spaceport directors. We internally within the security side have a classified roll-up that we're trying to figure out from a national threat perspective, but that's really where this came from. Our initial focus is on those FAA licensed spaceports. We, of course, will make it available to any even private site that might be interested in it, but it's all voluntary. We can't force anybody to do it. But the reviews do include physical security, counterterrorism, cyber assessments. We started our first one in February of 2022 at Spaceport America. Thanks to our friend Scott McLaughlin for being a good sport and letting us cut our teeth a little bit on him the first time around. To date, we've completed 7, believe it or not. We're actually working on our 8th today. The team is in Huntsville, working on the Huntsville reentry site. They're doing it today. So we're moving quite along. We do plan on finishing all of them by the end of calendar year 2023. And as I promised when we started this effort, I plan on using all of the data in a roll-up, unclassified, of course, document about best practices for security at spaceports. We're not quite ready to release one yet, but we are working on it. So it'll be a roll-up for everybody. Of course, not attributable to any one spaceport. It'll be kind of, sanitized, so you won't be able to necessarily tell the results from each. But we're trying to make the industry better, because security with the success of our industry starts to paint some targets on people's backs. So we want to make sure we're considering these things as well. And we're just looking to increase overall security. And here's a map. I think everyone's probably seen it, but to date, we've done, like I said, 7 of them. We're in Huntsville today, and we've got 4 or 5 left on the list to go. But we will be going to all the FAA licensed spaceports, which on this map are the ones with the little airplane symbol or the black font with a little rocket symbol. Those will be the ones we go to. There are other spaceports that we're happy to do the assessments on, private sites, even federal ranges if they wanted to partner with us. But our initial focus was on FAA licensed spaceports. Okay, now I'd like to switch gears and talk a little bit about the National Spaceport Interagency Working Group. I have briefed everyone that we were standing up, but I don't know that I've shown a lot of detail of what we've been doing yet. So let me see what I can show here today. Here are the member agencies for those that are interested, and we have all been participating in this for about a year, a little over a year. We started up February 2022, officially kicked it off in June when we signed our charter, but these are the member agencies on the interagency working group. And of course, here's our charter. This charter is actually on our website, but I've stolen some of the key words out of it just for this group's awareness. We want to maintain that U.S. leadership role in commercial space transportation. Like I said, we've got a rich history. We've got a lot of FAA licensed spaceports, and that could be a good example. We could share our experience with other countries that are coming, and it allows all of us to learn and get better together. We want to develop a strategy. I think I heard George mention the idea of a strategy, but we think it's important for spaceports. So we have a resilient and interoperable network of spaceports that can meet national objectives. We want to collaborate on policies and standards for spaceport utilization, trying to get some consistency to the best you can. I recognize that a lot of times, policies or standards might be written for a specific technology out of a certain spaceport, but if you raise it up a level, you can strive for consistency, which was what I think we'd like to see. And of course, the bottom one is very important. In all of this, as we're taking a deeper look at our spaceports, we want to be able to find ways to advocate for resources and programs. Maybe it's like I mentioned before, we identify gaps where there are known gaps in capabilities that might be, good places to invest. But we definitely need to look at advocating for resources to enhance our U.S. spaceport infrastructure. So here's some of the initial objectives. And again, this is also in our charter, but we do want to develop an action plan that will help define that spaceport strategy. And we want to, number 2 there, develop a plan for infrastructure grant programs, hopefully with some U.S. appropriated dollars from the federal government, but we are also trying to consider be creative and what are some alternate investment strategies if the U.S. government can't quite fit all the needs. We also want to establish and advocate for common terminology and standardization as we can with the infrastructure. That's going to be key to that interoperability goal. So we'd like to try to find ways to do that. This number 4, I always find very interesting. We want to analyze the relationship between federal spaceports and state, local, and private spaceports and make sure that they're all working together as efficiently as possible. In years past, it seemed a bit adversarial between federal spaceports and our FAA licensed spaceports. Some might think one's competing with the other. We really want to take a deeper look at it, and we have, to see how we can make improvements. I mean, we're all on the same team here. How can we work together and support our industry using each other's unique capabilities? We want to, as I mentioned, number 5, this is about investment methods. We want to look at being ways to be creative. Unfortunately, spaceports weren't named in the infrastructure spending bill that this administration was set forth, but are there other areas that we could, capitalize on some of that grant money that was made available for the benefit of our spaceports, green technologies, things like that might be available for us. And international partnerships is going to be key to that as well, to try to make sure that we can all look together to fill the needs for the industry. And then, of course, number 6, we don't want to lose sight of, let's try to be smarter. Are we doing things the most innovative and efficient ways to bring down launch cost and increase effectiveness? Throughput at ranges. Some of our ranges are quite congested. Are there things that we can do to increase throughput? So it's just, best ways to be economic and innovative in making sure we're using our infrastructure appropriately and most efficiently. So here are some of the challenges that the team has identified with the current infrastructure in spaceports today. Aging and inadequate infrastructure, I think that's probably well understood. Some of our launch infrastructure has been out there since the 60s, and they have to buy parts from eBay to keep going. So what can we do to innovate and keep improving with that infrastructure to keep pace with this industry? I mentioned scheduling a moment ago. Some of our spaceports are quite congested and have scheduling conflicts and prioritization. So that's another issue when it comes to airspace and maritime users. How do we work with all of that when you have a congested launch schedule? Capacity. I mentioned before in some of the initial spaceport utilization data, there is currently a lack of vertical launch sites. There are 92% of the launch activities were vertical, and less than 40% of our launch sites are vertical today. So what can we do? There's also, I believe, a shortage of engine test sites around the country. So we need to look at some of those capacity problems. Government funding is, of course, an issue. George mentioned at the top of the hour some things that GSA have been working on to get government funding, some policy efforts. There's definitely some challenges in there. The excess capacity model is an interesting one. In Title 51 of the Commercial Space Launch Act, it actually encourages the Secretary of Transportation to make available government facilities and services that are deemed excess. And if that is the case, then direct cost pricing is what should be utilized. Well, if we have some of our federal range spaceports that have been so successful at supporting the commercial industry that now they have over 80% of their launch activity is commercial, is that really excess capacity? Should they be hamstrung by charging direct cost pricing? Things like that from a policy perspective, we ought to look at. International leadership, there is not a ICAO-like body for international norms and things for space. I'm not advocating ICAO be involved in space. I'm just saying that is a forum, or that type of forum could be needed. UN COPIUS would probably be more appropriate just because they have space people involved. But definitely the US wants to be part of those international discussions so that we can try to have a consistent approach to launch and spaceport management. And then, of course, resiliency. If we have some congested spaceports, how close are we from one hurricane or one earthquake away from really losing a lot of capability without planning for that interoperability where you can move to another location should you need to. So resiliency is definitely something that we see as a challenge in there as well. So if we wanted to look at taking those challenges and putting forward into what could be some goals that could be employed in this strategy, these are some very top level things that we're kicking around as a preliminary basis. We think that we would like this strategy to nurture a vibrant and competitive commercial space transportation marketplace, not only domestically, but internationally. So what can we do to make sure that our spaceports are working with internationals and have some consistency there? We think that it's important for, like I said, global and national interoperability. That's going to be really important to maintaining that competitive, vibrant marketplace. And of course, what can we do to enhance spaceport management, efficiency, throughput, bringing down launch costs, all those things come to mind. So that would be a really big strategic goal. And then, of course, we want to be able to be adaptive and change. Our industry changes very, very quickly. So our spaceports need to be able to be part of that management plan, is to be dynamic and innovative in how we manage our spaceports. And then, of course, I already spoke about the resilient network of spaceports. what we want to do is take these strategic goals and put recommendations under each one of them that help go to the challenges that we've identified. And we're working on that right now. I just don't have any recommendations at the present time that I can share, but hopefully it gives you a little bit of a glimpse behind the curtain about what we have been working on and what we're trying to do. The plan is to get recommendations, at least draft recommendations, out for more broader review by around fourth quarter of this year, and we're working very hard on that right now. So these are the updates that I had for you today. I look forward to any questions that you guys have, but before I stop, I'll just highlight that on the page here, I've noted some resources that might be helpful for you. One I'd like to really highlight is that Spaceports by State website, that's the second one on the list. Take a look at that. Believe it or not, we actually get a lot of hits on that. It's one of the most popular sites that we have, and it is updated regularly with new information, capabilities. We try to make sure that information doesn't go stale. So take a look at that as often as you can, because it does describe kind of a airport facility directory for spaceports. It's our first cut at that. And that's what I have. And George, I don't know if there's any questions along the way, but happy to take any questions.
Yeah. Pam, Ted here. Will we get these slides? I like these links on these resources for sure.
I believe that's the plan, George, right? To distribute the slides?
Yes, we can make those available. So thanks. And thanks, Pam, for excellent presentation. If you have questions, anyone, feel free to type those into the chat box and we'll see how many we can get to. Let me just start with a fun one, Pam. Can you share with us what your number one challenge is these days in terms of accomplishing the mission of your office? And are there some items that, even those that are outside your control, if someone could solve them somehow, that would really improve the chance of success? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say the number one problem that we have as a regulator in my office is keeping pace with industry. Y'all move fast. You're fast. And the government is just not fast. And I am not a patient person. So I trust me, I don't take that idly. But keeping pace is a challenge. And I'm not saying that as to stop and give us a moment. No. We got to move faster. Don't stop. That's why we've been successful. That's why we have such a rich history. So keep going. The government just needs to try to find ways to move faster. And in that vein, George, I think that I'm really hoping that this spaceport strategy piece that we're working on ends up, the recommendations identified, helping the government position itself to support, to be more nimble. But that's going to come with some recommendations for support too. We in the United States, I think, are trailing a little bit with support for infrastructure funding.
Go. How's it going, Scott? Good. I'm on a meeting right now. But I know. Okay. No, Scott, it's okay.
Scott, if you can mute.
Quick update.
There we go.
Technology is great, isn't it? But yeah, it's gonna come with the need for support for infrastructure, and whether we're, like I said in my presentation, if we're able to successfully find creative ways that don't require government investment, that's great. But the U.S. government is trailing a little bit on infrastructure investment. Other countries have made infrastructure investments or are paying U.S. companies to come develop it for them. So we ought to not rely on our rich history. We ought to keep using that to press into the future. And so that's probably an area that I know the FAA won't be able to advocate for as well as the industry will, because you guys can describe the needs way better than we can.
Sounds great. And about spaceports, I think a lot of people do not necessarily understand how sites get chosen. And so they want to know, so how does the FAA decide where we're going to put the next spaceport? Could you talk a little bit about that, just to level set the conversations and what the FAA role and all that is?
Absolutely. I promise you, it is not because Pam Underwood picks. I don't have that choice. It's really up to the proponents. And what I mean by that is someone has the opportunity to come to the FAA and propose, we want to put a spaceport here. They'll do that by first entering pre-application consultation for an FAA launch or reentry site operator license. And through that, we'll have an opportunity to talk through. And I have a number of spaceports, proposed spaceports that have been talking with us, trying to get some ideas. We do our best to share experiences from what other folks have experienced, things to consider. But yes, it's proposed based on, a locality or a certain area decides they want to put in a spaceport. So it's based on, a proposal, a proponent to bring it forward.
Okay, and I think most folks have had a chance to look at the URLs now, so maybe you could stop sharing. So that sounds good. Next question. Right now, as you pointed out, we have 14 FAA licensed spaceports, plus a number of other government-owned and operated and privately owned sites. And then several dozen sites are in operation or in development around the world.
Mm-hmm.
How many do we need? How much capacity is appropriate? Could you share your thoughts on that?
Absolutely. So what my favorite answer to this is, it's not a number. It's definitely not a number, because who could pick the number? Is 14 right? Is 5 right? Is 30 right? I don't know. What's the right number? It's like trying to tell me how many pairs of shoes I need, which my husband would love to tell me, but I'm not going to accept a number. It's based on, a capability. And what is the industry needs? So the capability to support our industry and resilience, which I don't think we have a great deal of resilience today. I think we could do better. We have a number of spaceports in our country, more than any other country, but I don't know that they're really utilized and leveraged as a network. They're more as individuals. So we need to leverage it better. I think that'll increase our resilience. So that's the best way to answer how many do we need. It's really driven by capabilities and industry, innovation and things like that, rather than just a raw number.
And got a question from Craig Smith out in Oklahoma. Any figures you can share on the current number of applicants or states that are seeking spaceport licenses? I know we don't normally.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I wish I could share with you, Craig. I do. What we typically do in the FAA when it comes to pre-application consultation, that is not a public domain. So the FAA doesn't publicize numbers of people in pre-app. If there are entities that make their own announcements, then that's great. Then we're happy to acknowledge that they're there. But yeah, I'm sorry, I just don't have numbers. There are folks looking at it, but I can't confirm or deny the numbers. Sorry about that.
Just a few comments along those lines. When I hear the question, how many spaceports do we need? I sometimes like to try to turn that around and say, well, how many airports do you think we need? And good question. I don't know the answer to that either, but I can tell you that there are over 20,000 airports in the United States and more than 40,000 airports worldwide. And you could make that, well, gosh, why do we need so many? Why can't you just fly out of Dulles? Well, that wouldn't help you too much, Pam, if you're in Florida.
No, that's a long trip to Dulles. I wouldn't drive up there.
So obviously, not all spaceports are alike, and that's fine. We have different applications for different kinds of missions, and that's a good thing. And so it's each local area, community, or company or organization that gets to decide, hey, we want to make a go of it, and then their role would be to share the information with the FAA and make sure that the government is comfortable that can be operated safely. Related topic, we've been talking a little bit about the point-to-point. I think that's really going to change both how many spaceports we need and how we use our spaceports once we start seeing these vehicles, whether it's horizontal takeoff and landing or vertical, that are going to be able to travel from one side of the planet to the other in an hour or two. I think that is going to change the conversation quite a bit. So stand by on that one. So how about some financial questions? Is it realistic to think that a spaceport could turn a profit? Or is this more of an investment that a nation or an entity needs to make in capabilities?
I think it is. I think all of our spaceports, our FAA licensed spaceports, need to turn a profit. I mean, I think all the spaceport directors on here would say, well, gosh, if I don't, then my board's not going to like me very much. So I do think it's important, but going back to that ecosystem that provides it as a spaceport, it's not just launch. Launch occurs at a finite number of times per year, and that can't be the only day per year that a spaceport is making money. There's got to be other ways that they're doing it, whether it's because they're hosting, manufacturing operations, so they have maybe tenants on their site, or engine testing facilities. Like I said, we actually have a shortage of those around the country. I know some folks that are looking for some. Those types of things are and others that would be how they pay the bills on a day-to-day basis. All of it feeds into supporting launch, because that's that ecosystem that has to exist for launch to occur from a spaceport. But honestly, you're going to have to look at drawing some type of income from those types of ecosystem, the ancillary services at your site, to be able to draw the money. And I think that's where making sure that you can be profitable kind of comes from.
Very good. So here's a question from Scott. Obviously, it's early yet. Anything you can say based on what we know so far on what is being learned from launch of Starship, both for companies and the sites themselves?
Well, I think it's really exciting because their plan was really to demo, take off from one point and land in another point. That's really exciting. I can't speak to anything going on, with the particular activities or the anomaly that, it may have occurred. So that I can't speak to any specifics to that, but I just think what it stood for and what it was trying to accomplish is really powerful. Because George mentioned, point to point, and we need to have vehicles be ready to do this, but I like the idea of demonstration where we can, because it's not just getting the vehicle ready to do this mission, it's getting the systems ready to handle it too. The air traffic control ready to manage, from this point to this point, the procedures, the agreements that might need to be put in place. All those operational details need to be exercised too. That's what I think demonstration really stands for. So, if even on a small scale, that's what that, Starship was trying to accomplish, albeit it wasn't 100% successful. They did accomplish quite a bit for their own company objectives, but that's the kind of thing that I'd like to see the industry move towards in demonstrating and getting closer to making that a reality.
Very good. Ted, did you have a question or comment on that you wanted to raise?
Yes, I did, Dr. Neal. Thank you for that. Getting back to this notion of how many spaceports are enough, the piece that misses in that discussion and that question is the fact that all spaceports are not created equal. So I could understand that question better if all 14 spaceports had the exact same capability and capacity. And in fact, they do not. All spaceports may not even actually have launched anything out of their spaceport, and is not their business model to launch anything out of their spaceport in the near future. So one has to, I think, peel that question back a layer. Don't accept the premise and don't actually answer it on its face, right? You got to peel it back and talk about the capabilities of the 14 air spaceports, and then what capacity and capability that brings to assured access to space for the nation. And
Very good, thanks. Okay, and then related to that, some folks are asking about, do we need some testing on fuels and engines and so forth? I believe FAA has tried to look at some of the more modern or unique propellants that are being used now. Anything you can share on what's going on there, Pam?
Yeah, so there's definitely a LOX methane study that's underway. And I'll be honest, I don't have the latest on it, so I apologize. I'm probably not the best person to ask. But we do have a LOX methane study underway, and if there are others, then by all means, let us know, because I think that looking at different types of fuels and engines and things is probably one of the ways that our industry is innovating. And then, of course, our spaceports need to be ready for that as well.
Okay, and Benjamin had a question about international agencies and who's engaged in point-to-point strategies and discussions and so forth. I know the FAA is meeting with a lot of different countries in terms of spaceports and commercial space in general. In particular, certainly the UK has expressed an interest in trying to work with us along those lines. In fact, have signed a memorandum of agreement, I believe, with the FAA on working together on some of that. And any other countries or entities that have expressed a particular interest in point-to-point or similar type of activities?
So I think any spaceport that's pursuing definitely horizontal launch is interested in point-to-point. And I can tell you that I've heard from multiple countries in this area, Japan, Australia, Italy, those are probably the ones I could talk about the most, but there's a number of them that are interested in developing space capabilities. And interestingly enough, they're all interested in US operators coming there, because they may not organically have their own vehicles within their own country, but having this expertise from the US, from the launch vehicles that we have in the companies, helps them establish their own capabilities within their country. And we support that from what can we share from our experience? How can the US government and these US companies help really kind of mold this global commercial space transportation industry?
Excellent. And for those who are following the chat box, Pat Hines has shared the link to the database for spaceport emergency data spaceport emergence data, and huge resource there for research and trying to understand what's been done in the past and why things are the way they are. So if you haven't checked that out, I encourage you to do that. One other question for you, Pam. Let's talk about workforce. How is competition for workforce affecting the FAA and the companies that you're working with in commercial space these days?
Oh, it's brutal. It's really brutal. It's challenging to find, new people, even fresh out of college, because there's so many different opportunities for them to go into a space on this call that's tried to hire engineers anymore, or even non-engineers interested in working in space in the areas of policy or transportation management, things like that. It's just tough. It's particularly tough for the FAA because I always like to joke, it's just not sexy to say you're a regulator. We don't build the hardware, we don't manufacture it, we don't design it, we don't even hardly get to touch it. So it's really hard to then get people interested in doing that. So it's a challenge, but it's one that I think that we're really up to finding. So the FAA has given special hiring authorities to engineers that are determined into critical needs. A lot of our positions that we're hiring for are established under that, so that helps. But it is just tough finding people. You really got to, go read the resumes, go recruit, go do those things. I encourage, things like the Space Cup that's done at Spaceport America. Really, those types of STEM activities that get this future generation excited about space and working in space in the industry, because that's going to help all of us to be able to find more new talent. Because I think it's a struggle. As our industry continues to grow, it will probably continue to be a struggle, but that's just showing that our industry is successful.
Excellent. Coming to the end of our time here, but Pam, let me just ask if you have any closing comments for the group. Really appreciate you coming to talk to us today.
Yeah, so I love talking to you guys because it gives us time to make sure that we're on a vector check. Office of Spaceports was stood up in 2018 for a number of different reasons. You can go look at the functions, but we're a policy shop, and we want to make sure that we're moving along with the industry. So these types of opportunities where I can, talk with you guys or get feedback is really, really helpful to us. And I appreciate it, George. Thank you.
Absolutely. So a reminder to all, as we mentioned, we do plan to continue to push for some of the things that the spaceport community needs. And so check your mailbox this afternoon. We will be sharing with you the top level list of asks that we mentioned at the Spaceport Summit, with policies, laws, regulations, and funding needs that we think are appropriate. And then some draft legislation that we are starting to share with those in Congress and their staffers in terms of at least the starting point for making some of those things possible. And so check your mailbox this afternoon for that. And then we'd love your help in having discussions with our elected representatives on what the important needs are and what our priorities are going forward. If you have particular questions on what you see or suggestions for how we can improve our message, then certainly welcome that feedback. So with that, let me turn it back to James for some closing comments.
Well, thank you, Pam. Thank you, George. That was really fantastic. When you put the two of them together, they're just an unbeatable combination. I just want to flag something I should have mentioned at the start. Please note in your calendars the week of January 30, 2024. That's the Spaceport Summit, followed by Space Mobility and Space Com, all part of Commercial Space Week. So put that on your calendar. And thank you all very much for your attendance today, and we look forward to talking to you soon. Bye-bye.